Elizabeth Cady Stanton, 1815–1902, early feminist, civil rights activist and women's rights advocate. Cady Stanton. Elizabeth Cady Stanton used to be an influential determinant in the civil rights movement of the 19th century. Stanton recommended the cease of slavery and equal rights for female and black Americans. After the American Civil War, Stanton grew to be increasingly more centered on the difficulty of lady suffrage and feminist issues. She used to be a sturdy supporter of the temperance motion and was once additionally essential of organized Christianity for relegating the function of women. She wrote influential pamphlets and books, including Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions, 1848, A Petition for Universal Suffrage, 1866, History of Woman Suffrage, 1881–1922, The Woman's Bible, 1895–1898. She is viewed with the aid of many to be one of the key founders of the women's rights movement in the U.S. Early life. Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Elizabeth used to be born in New York, November 12, 1815. Her father, Daniel Cady, used to be a distinguished legal professional and rose to be a New York Supreme Court justice. Elizabeth received a vast publicity to her father's regulation library and shared his activity in law. Unlike many women of her age, Elizabeth received a wide-ranging education, which gave her an appreciation of the bias which discriminated towards female and black people. She carried out her schooling at the Troy Female Seminary in New York. Early activism. Despite already conserving feminist and abolitionist views, her first political activism used to be inside the temperance movement. It was once right here that she met Henry Brewster Stanton, a journalist and energetic abolitionist. They married in 1840 and collectively had 6 children. Their marriage was once long-lasting, regardless of disagreeing on the problem of women's suffrage. Her marriage to Henry introduced Elizabeth into the main mental and abolitionist circles of Boston. She got here to meet distinguished anti-slavery activists, such as Frederick Douglass, Louisa May Alcott and Ralph Waldo Emerson. In 1847, the Stantons moved away from Boston to Seneca Falls in New York. Here Stanton had much less mental cooperation and, for a time, felt unfulfilled through her dominant function of mom and bringing up her children. However, prompted through the political troubles of equality, she used her dynamism and strength to organize like-minded ladies into a new women's rights group, the Women's Rights Movement. In 1848, Elizabeth joined with Lucretia Mott and 300 different ladies to organize the first women's rights conference in Seneca Falls. It was once at this convention that Elizabeth drafted and posted her Declaration of Sentiments, which declared the vital equality of girls and men. Based on the U.S. Declaration of Independence, it referred to as for regular girl suffrage and extension of equal rights. We keep these truths to be self-evident, that all guys and girls are created equal, that they are endowed by using their Creator with sure inalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to tightly close these rights governments are instituted, deriving their simply powers from the consent of the governed. Declaration of Sentiments, 1848. This convention of 1848 is considered as a very great tournament in developing the contemporary motion of women's rights in America. Elizabeth Cady Stanton grew to be one of the main figures and spokesperson for The motion and her recreation added her into contact with comparable women, such as Susan B. Anthony. Stanton would frequently write speeches for Susan B. Anthony, and they shared a shut friendship for over 50 years. After the Civil War, Stanton was once dissatisfied by way of many in the civil rights motion who had been inclined to promote standard suffrage for black and white guys in priority over women's rights. Stanton felt it unacceptable that rights for black guys got here at the fee of shedding aid for lady suffrage. After this point, even though nonetheless a supporter of civil rights, Stanton an increasing number of centered on simply women's issues. In 1866, with different suffragists, she drafted a petition for universal suffrage, which demanded the vote be given besides regard for intercourse or race. It was once added to the U.S. Congress by using Thaddeus Stevens, a Republican congressman, link. But the 14th and 15th modification have been adopted, except mentioning girls would be given the vote. However, the file supplied a necessary platform for the women's rights motion over the subsequent few decades. Suffrage. The undersigned, women of the United States, respectfully ask a change of the Constitution that shall limit the countless states from disfranchising any of their residents on the floor of sex. In making our demand for suffrage, we would name your interest to the truth that we characterize 15 million people, one half of the whole populace of the country, intelligent, virtuous, native-born American citizens, and but stand backyard the faded of political recognition. In 1869, Anthony and Stanton based the National Woman Suffrage Association, NWSA. This brought on a breakup in the women's rights motion due to the fact the NWSA antagonistic the 15th modification until it blanketed a point out of women's rights. Stanton additionally desired a broader marketing campaign for different women's rights, such as equal gender regulation for divorce, guide of contraception and equal rights for ladies in society. These needs had been pretty radical for the time, however Stanton's concept was once in a position to push them onto the agenda of the NWSA. In her eloquent Solitude of the Self speech, Stanton additionally spoke extra about her imaginative and prescient for girls to emerge as greater impartial of men. No remember how a whole lot female choose to lean, to be included and supported, nor how tons guys want to have them do so. They need to make the voyage of existence alone, and for security in an emergency they need to understand something of the legal guidelines of navigation. Solitude of Self, 1892, full speech, religious views for a brief time. Elizabeth used to be influenced by means of the revivalist preacher Charlie Grandison Finney. His dire warnings of everlasting damnation worried the younger Elizabeth, however her household influenced her to pass this revivalist philosophy and she later became towards organized Christianity, preferring an extra-reasoned trust in universal ethics. I have endeavored to dissipate these spiritual superstitions from the minds of women, and base their belief on science and reason. The place I located for myself at final that peace and relief I ought to in no way discover in the Bible and the Church. The degraded status of woman in the Bible. Free Thought Magazine 14-540, September 1896. Stanton's view on faith was once pretty radical for a strongly Christian society. She was once quintessential of the major organized religions for aiding the relegation of women's position in society. In 1895, she first posted The Woman's Bible, which sought to exhibit justification for women's equality and was once necessary of religion's view of women. This created some other divide with the extra-conservative American woman's suffrage organization. However, towards Stanton's objections, the two corporations have been subsequently merged in 1890, with Stanton as the first president. When time allowed, Stanton traveled round the world, specifically to the UK and Europe, coming into contact with British suffragists such as Emily Pankhurst. In 1888 she helped located the International Council of Women. She remained an energetic campaigner till her death, from coronary heart failure, in 1902. At her domestic in New York. Legacy of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Stanton was once a very influential civil rights activist of the 19th century. In many ways, she used to be the most outstanding discern in the beginning of the women's rights movement. After her death, her unorthodox views on faith and wider gender problems precipitated many conservative females to downplay her position and promote Susan B. Anthony as the predominant founder of the women's rights movement instead. Stanton's best contribution was once possibly in her clear and sturdy presentation of the case for women's rights. Her writings, such as Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions, assisting girls' suffrage, had been very clear and influential. Further remarks, now, in view of this complete disfranchisement of one half the humans of this country, their social and spiritual degradation, in view of the unjust legal guidelines above mentioned, and due to the fact girls do sense themselves aggrieved, oppressed, and fraudulently disadvantaged of their most sacred rights, we insist that they have on-the-spot admission to all the rights and privileges which belong to them as residents of these United States. In getting into upon the extremely good work earlier than us, we assume no small quantity of misconception, misrepresentation, and ridicule. However, we shall use each instrumentality inside our electricity to impact our object. We shall rent agents, flow into tracts, petition the state and country-wide legislatures, and activity to enlist the pulpit and the press in our behalf. We hope this convention will be observed through a collection of conventions, embracing each and every phase of the country.